Today's session is called From Local to Global and relates to the work that educators we do. We reach out to our students, and some of our students are local, or students are like from overseas, but also the work that we do influences different spheres. And my co-session panelists are Cynthia, Lawson, Jaramillo, Dean of School of Design Strategies at Parsons School of Design, and also Alejandra Zambrano, who is Associate Professor at the Universidad San Francisco de Quito. I have the privilege of both knowing these women personally. They are friends of mine. I work with them in multiple occasions. And I cannot even emphasize how amazed I am of like having this opportunity to have these conversations. Also, we are, the three of us, we are all part of a shared cultural identity. We are from South America. So this is even more like Latinas Unidas. The session hosts Alberto, Liz, and Melanie. They are helping and they're doing the amazing technical things. So if you have any questions, please shoot them a message in private. I'll start and I'll try to go really quick because I want more to for you all to listen to the co-panelists. So I'm a professor of graphic design at the University of Houston downtown, but what brings me to this session is my experience with my organization called Design Global Change. I started in 2008, many years ago. It involves working with students, design students, but also we have collaborated with students from different programs across the universities that the organization has worked with. I'm right now in my third institution. I've been switching around places, and these students have been part of projects both internationally and locally. The idea behind is that partnering with organizations. So we have some work that here in these slides is just like a very big compendium of work done, both at the local community, painted murals in downtown Hartford, and also in other organizations have partnered with us to make murals. We work in India. Two times took students to India specifically, and the students had opportunities to create projects, and also projects in Kenya. In India, it was like a great project experience for me because the students who participated, then they became part of organizations themselves that are working with global issues. So I'm very proud, and you know, one of the students was mentioned in a session with Rich Holland, so I was like, yeah, that's my former student. The projects in India involved gender equality, water and sanitation, and they were very powerful, and it changed the perspective of the relationship between students and community members. And one of the things that was important is that no longer the students were assisting the locals, they were learning from the locals. And this is one of the challenges that in working with a community, people think, oh, we're going to go there help, and that's not the case. We work together. So many of these projects involved local organizations, non-profit organizations, and then the partnerships that my students will be working in the location where they are studying, but then we will have a lot of international connections. And some of these projects were before this convenience of Zoom. So it involved a lot of like taking things to the local location, like for example, to India. We will partner with Engineers Without Borders, and they will bring the designs and we will get feedback. And it will be like a really like long Skype session with lots of technical problems. So we were doing pre-pandemic technology at a time that, you know, we didn't ever imagine that this would be like a day-to-day thing. And then one of the largest projects that had an application was in Kenya, in Peru, and in Mexico. And this one is showing like the projects specifically for Kenya. So this was the partnership with prosthetic trainers. that will work with community organizations locally. And it was made possible, two of my projects actually were made possible thanks to SAPI Ideas That Matter, which if at this point there's still a design educator that doesn't know about this is an amazing, amazing program. So please consider applying whenever the call is available. It has supported two of my projects. And this project, it was a great experience that took about 4 years making and continuing this project. So I partnered with prosthetic trainers to create visuals that will allow clinicians, local clinicians, to help amputees that don't have the means to access to like formal doctors. So there will be a clinician that trains a person, and then that person shares in the local villages in very inaccessible locations. So these were like printed vinyl posters and also brochures and things like that. So this thing is an example of what we can do when we can actually go somewhere, when we have the ability to move from one location to another location, be it by producing materials or by traveling there and, or, you know, sending the materials or traveling there. And obviously these things have changed a lot, right? Because of the current coronavirus situation. And then like the last thing that I wanted to mention, because it connects, it ties up all this together, is my latest initiative is related to Ecuador and the Amazon rainforest, and one of the panelists here, Alejandra, is my co-conspirator. We work on this location. It's in Yasuni National Park in Ecuador. And last year in October, we spent a really amazing week working with kids, teenagers at the school. This is a very isolated school, and one of the challenges is like to understand what's happening with the local environment, the natural environment. So with Alejandra, she has an amazing experience in storytelling, and she will tell you a little bit more about it. But the idea is to create a way to communicate this natural environment to kids, where it's being affected, the location is being affected by the oil companies. And so understanding what happens when things in nature change and what can we do about it. So one of the things was a project about the jaguar. And there's a lot about this project that is amazing, and it's an ongoing project. So we got the kids to do illustrations about this animal, this top predator, and the importance in the ecosystem. And the way that I am bringing this idea of designing local to go to global is with the students at the University of Houston downtown. We are doing color illustration books, and some actually are coloring books too, but I don't have examples of that. So we are doing an illustration, a children's illustration book with different styles of illustrations, because this is each student communicating a story and information about the animals that live in this place, in this rainforest in Ecuador. So the students have an animal list to pick, animals, plants, all like the living ecosystem. They pick from that list. And this is thanks to an ecologist that's working with us in this team. And he provides like information about, you know, what the importance of these subjects. So the students illustrate these different animals. And this is a close-up view of how it will look like in this children illustration book. So it's partly, you know, a very simple style of information graphic, where the idea is a student can learn about a subject matter that is important in nature, but also helps connect with the kids in Ecuador, that when they see this, they understand more about the environment. The idea behind this project is like I got funding from my institution, fortunately, to produce these illustration books for the kids. And before the pandemic, I was supposed to be in Ecuador this summer. Obviously that completely changed, which is not bad, because that gives me more time to develop further this project and have a more consistent approach, and working longer with Alejandra to produce this idea of what's the narrative that connects all these like illustrations together. So that's an overview of how I've been like approaching a little bit of the local to global, but mostly the key now is what amazed me is that the students in the past wouldn't be able to communicate with people from Ecuador or from Colombia, or from anywhere pretty much, because we were like always thinking we have to move students to a new location, to a new country, to go through like lots of paperwork and program proposals. But the good thing about what's keeping us in one spot right now is that we could do events like Zoom, we could use Zoom, and we could do events like Shift, and we have this opportunity to connect anywhere. I was chatting with students in Japan like a couple of weeks ago. So I can see this challenge that the coronavirus pandemic is presenting as a way to connect more, to interact more, and that's why when I thought about like how to approach this session, I wanted to get everyone else exposed to the amazing work that Cynthia and Alejandra have been doing. So for that, I would like to move over with Cynthia now.
Thank you so much, Natacha, and thank you all so much for joining us here. So I'm at Parsons School of Design in New York City. I'm the Dean of the School of Design Strategies. I'm Associate Professor of Integrated Design, and a lot of the work and the conversation today is stemming from the work that I've done through the DEED Research Lab, which I co-founded and now direct. The upside down map is also a nod to Maria Mater's earlier, "This country, not America." So just encouraging all of us to be mindful of the language that we use and the positionality that we have when we use certain labels. And the work that I'm presenting today, the global work, has happened in Colombia, in Dominican Republic, and in Guatemala. Next slide. So the Parsons DEED Lab, we started it in 2007, and it was really a multidisciplinary team of faculty, staff, and students from design, international affairs, management, marketing, and we came together to start, initially it was a collaboration looking at how we could support a community of indigenous artisan women in the small town in Guatemala called San Lucas Soliman. And it's really grown and evolved to become a laboratory that is interested in the future of artisans and their children. There's this really, I would say that the main motivator of the lab's work is the valuation of the artisan sector as a $520 billion industry, yet the majority of the world's artisans live in poverty and marginalized. So we're interested in not perpetuating the inequitable models that we've seen of collaboration between designers and artisans, and instead really want to think beyond the existing models and how we can create a more sustainable sector for artisans and their families. Next slide. So a little bit about our work. Our most recent projects have evolved around developing case studies. So really trying to capture what are some of the strengths of the organizations that already exist that connect design with centuries-old artisan techniques that are looking at poverty alleviation, artisan empowerment, cultural heritage as shared goals, I would say. We've also done our own fieldwork programs where we've traveled with students and faculty from the New School and Parsons School of Design to, as I mentioned before, to Colombia and to Guatemala. And then we've also have had various experiences that we started to touch on a little bit in an earlier session today, working directly with artisan groups as well as working through NGOs, through nonprofits. And that's something that also interests me regarding community engagement, is when are you working directly with community stakeholders, and when are you working within the constraints, bounds, and even the politics of larger organizations. Next slide. Most recently, our most recent collaborative project is in fact with the quilt makers of Gsband Alabama here in the United States. And I was really excited to, and had for several years been thinking about how we could bring some of our learning and experiences that we had been doing in Colombia and Guatemala, and bring that to the craft sector within the United States. And I became familiar with the work of Gsband a couple of years ago, started researching everything I could find about them, and met one of the fourth generation quilt makers who still lives in Alabama, Claudia Petway. And this past January had the fortune of traveling with Ibarra Wadud, whom you see in the photo, and we were able to have this amazing kickoff workshop. As you see, that particular post-it note says "Things My Ancestors Say," and what Ibarra and I were interested in exploring, that Ibarra then continued in the Artisan Futures class in the spring, was really looking at the place of Gsband, the cultural heritage of the quilts that these women have been making, that they started making them as partly to process the trauma of having been enslaved, but also because of necessity of not having heating at the time. They've been celebrated historically, yet that region is still extremely poor, and a lot of the quilt makers are not necessarily known. They don't live off of their quilting. So many of the inequities, relationships of power, systemic inequalities that we see globally, we certainly have locally. And it's something in particular I'm interested to hear from all of you as well. I think the pandemic really affords us this unique moment to have this kind of shared crisis in some way. Next slide. The way we've done the work I shared, we also have been quite committed to thinking about how we do our work. So we have a set of fieldwork principles that all of the members of our university community that participate in the projects have to agree to. These are quite specific to working with artisans, such as the no monetary exchange, but there are others that I encourage you to consider for your own external community engaged work. And one of the hardest ones that we follow both in our teaching as well as in the fieldwork is we don't ever use the word help. And we try to not use these unidirectional words that assume that we know what people need, that we could possibly address all of the systemic issues that perhaps create the inequalities or needs in the lives of people. And most importantly, it really, if you don't allow yourself to use the word help, you really have to be able to then express and say, what is it that you mean by helping? Is this about education? Is it about income generation? Is it about cultural exchange? Is it about fieldwork research? So really not trying to claim impact where we may not be able to have it. Next slide. This year, this is work in progress, and happy to stay in conversation with anyone who may want to be tuned into this. With some colleagues, we've developed this project called Community Engagement 101. And we're asking ourselves, what is that basic introductory curriculum that every student and faculty member should go through before engaging with external marginalized communities to reach more just and collaborative exchanges? That long list of questions on the right side, we could add more to that, so certainly happy to discuss in the Q&A. But these are some of the questions that we're starting to develop within our resources, so that when a faculty member is preparing that syllabus with an external partner, we start to ask ourselves these very difficult questions of, why are we even interested in this kind of work? How am I ensuring that the partnership is equitable? And an interesting one that came up from colleagues at the university, how can I leverage the university resources to benefit the community long term? And then finally, just wanted to end with, if you go to the next one, is that the last slide? Yeah. So I just, really thinking about the theme of this week and now the conversations I've tuned into, this idea of shifting because of the pandemic, shifting because we're now virtual, really thinking about the opportunity, but also a reminder again that for us, it may be shifting, but for the majority of people on the planet, they don't necessarily have the luxury of shifting, nor do they feel like they're shifting because of the pandemic, because they, in their everyday lives, experience all sorts of crises. So I thought that could also be something that we discuss in the session. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now I introduce Alejandra Zambrano.
Can you hear me now? Yes? Okay. Well, good afternoon to all. Thank you very much for being here with us in this panel. Thank you, Natacha, for inviting me to this panel from local to global. My name is Alejandra Zambrano. I'm an associate professor at the School of Social Sciences and Humanities at the Universidad San Francisco de Quito in Ecuador, where I teach mostly literature and creative writing classes. Our school is, not yet, go back. Our school is a private liberal arts college. We have approximately 9,000 students. We have a very diverse student population, and we mostly do undergraduate programs, although we have a couple of graduate programs as well. Today, I'm gonna share with you my experience as the founder and executive director of La Poderosa Media Project. And I'm gonna tell you a little bit about how we go about working together with historically underrepresented communities to build a better future. Next slide, please. La Poderosa is a 501c3 nonprofit organization. It was founded back in 2005 when some friends and I were graduate students at the University of Texas at Austin. And somehow we wanted to start a project in order to support communities in our home countries. Most of us, we came from different Latin American countries, and our background was in education and the arts and filmmaking and so forth. So this is how we started developing a project it was based in filmmaking. Filmmaking was our excuse to work to bring together different communities. So for many years, what we did is to bring American college students and Ecuadorian high school students during a summer program that lasted 6 weeks, 120 hours total. And they worked collaboratively in the pre-production, production, and post-production of fiction short films and documentaries. So basically, our mission as an organization is to promote creative autonomy and collaborative learning through community-based arts programs in the Americas. And I say the Americas plural because we've been working in the United States, Mexico, the Dominican Republic, Panama, Ecuador, Chile, Argentina. So we consider the whole continent, right? And we are always moved by our vision of transforming our communities one story at a time. Next slide, please. I don't know if you heard about it, but in 2016, the Pacific coast of Ecuador was struck by an earthquake. It was really bad, and it caused severe damages to many cities and towns in the coast of Ecuador, including Bahia de Caracas, where our program was based. So it was really difficult for us because we had to stop our exchange program because no institution of higher education and no parents would like to send their kids to study abroad in this type of disaster zones, right? So right now that program is on hold, and we are waiting to see what happens in the next years to see if we can reactivate and start this program again. This program was, I think it's our star program because as Natacha and Cynthia were talking earlier, they were saying that we are not working with the community, we're learning collaboratively with the community. So we're trying to make this a more equitable exchange. And yeah, you can, next slide, please. So the more that we work with communities, so the more that we knew about their interests and desires and fears and all that. So at the beginning, we started working with teenagers, ages 13 to 19 and up. But now what we did is we started also expanding our programs to cover other members of the community. So in 2010, we founded Foods That Heal, Comidas Que Curan. So what we did is we brought together our students from the filmmaking program and we trained them in the best practices and methodologies of oral history and ethnography so that they can go and interview their grandmothers and great-grandmothers about food about ancestral ways of preparing foods and medicinal herbs and why not. And it was really nice because all these conversations ended up, they took us to places where we discussed capitalism or globalization, or why is it that young people right now, they rather eat McDonald's than the dish that you can see in this picture, which is a traditional dish from the coast of Ecuador, and it is delicious. Next slide, please. Yeah, I'm not gonna talk a lot about this project because Natacha already mentioned this collaboration. But another thing that I'm trying to do also from a position at the university is to find more partnerships with colleagues from other schools, not just my School of Social Sciences and Humanities, but other professors who are doing science programs or who are in the School of Arts and Communications. And this is how we ended up working at one of our research stations. My university has two research stations, one in the Galapagos Islands and one in the Tiputini, which is within the Yasuni National Park in the Amazon region. And we were working with Waurani kids. Waurani is one of the our indigenous nationalities here in the country. Next slide, please. And now I want to talk a little bit more about one initiative that I think it fits the idea of this conference and also the idea of this panel, which is how do we go from local to global and probably back to local again. So in the fall 2019, I got a grant basically from the Oral History in the Liberal Arts Initiative. And that allowed me to have this partnership with two other colleagues, one from American University in Nigeria and another one from Flame University in India. So we all three came from different disciplines, but we decided to work together and connect our classes under one topic. And this topic is narratives of food and migration. We made sure that at least 25% of our syllabi was the same, that we share the same readings, the same movie screenings, the same assignments. And one of the assignments, which I think it was really nice and fun for students, was to exchange a local recipe. So we had our students think of what is the recipe that everyone has to try if they ever visited Ecuador. And then we exchanged recipes, and when you got the recipe from another country, students had to do it, they have to make it, they had to go buy the ingredients. If they didn't find any ingredients, they had to figure out a way to substitute the ingredient and also make videos and share it with the community. So it was a very nice thing to do early in the semester, so students got to know more about the other countries. I realized that my students knew very little about India, and basically nothing, zero about Nigeria. So that gave us an excuse to start exploring what is happening on the other side of the world. So after this brief introduction, each campus, we went back to our local research. In my case, it was a creative writing class that's called Oral History and Digital Storytelling. I had my students interview 12 migrants, people who for different reasons, they ended up in this country. And a big chunk of the interviews, they focused on food and childhood memories and nostalgia and politics as well. We made these videos that you can find on La Poderosa Media Project's YouTube web channel. And then we took these videos as an excuse to listen to the other people's stories and talk about what is happening in terms of migration. What is happening in migration here in Ecuador is not very much different from what is happening in Nigeria or let's say India. So it gave us an excuse to also think of migration as a global phenomenon. You can change the slide, please. Yes, so basically you can find our work on our YouTube channel, our Facebook page. Leaving you there my two email addresses, my institutional and also the organization's email address. Really, I'd be really happy to answer to any of your questions and also to connect with you after this session is over. And hopefully we can, promote more collaborative learning and more collaboration across disciplines, across our borders as well, and taking advantage of all the technology that we have available right now, because now with Zoom, actually I did this project before the pandemic, and I'm thinking about using this model for my future classes, or at least until we can go back to a more normal face-to-face interaction with our students. Yeah, thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. It was a great presentation, and both of my friends and colleagues are very modest in the way they talk about their work. It's much more extensive, so I please welcome you to like take a look at their websites later on. So what we would like to do is a little bit of discussion and questions, and some of the things that I've been glancing and trying to multitask from the chat. Penina mentioned about the idea of help and like removing that word from the vocabulary, and also having a plan when we are entering a community and then when we exit a community. So I would like Cynthia, if you have some thoughts about that. I've seen some of your responses, but like for the larger group.
Yeah, sure. Happy to jump in. Glad that our you know, banning the word help resonated with so many of you. Yeah, I mean, we also shouldn't just say we're not going to do anything, because we can take advantage of our various, you know, access to funds, privilege of communicating, of being able to move across borders, etc., that can benefit a lot of people. But yeah, just assuming that we know what people need, I think is probably the main reason why people default to the word help. And then, yeah, I shared on the chat, a colleague from International Affairs graduate program at the university shared this notion of, before you kick off a community engagement, make sure you have an exit plan. And that, I would say, I've not been so good at doing, because we always start the collaboration with the hope that it will be long-term. One of our fieldwork principles is we don't make any promises, and in big part it's because of that. So we know that we can be there, let's say, for a 2-week period of time on a particular date. We know what we want our long-term goals to be, and then everything else is kind of uncertain. What faculty are going to want to continue with this work if it doesn't count towards their promotion, what students are going to, you know, move on to other priorities, what will the university want to support next. So just many different variables that create that uncertainty of the time frame, I would say, for a collaboration.
How about you, Alejandra? I know that a lot of the projects are always collaborative, and this is one of the things that we also discussed when we were like working on the Tiputini Yazuni project. So what are your thoughts?
I think that I've always done collaboration. I think my work is interdisciplinary. I have my graduate degree in literature, Latin American literature. But when I was in college, I also did a little bit of fine arts and human rights. And I've been surrounded by people who come from different disciplines. So from very early in my work with communities back in 2005, I always thought that collaboration across disciplines is what we should be doing. And right now, every time I have to create a project, so by the way, I'm not a designer, right? But I think that every time I have to go to a community, or when we are coming up with ideas on to how to do this project, you have to design, right? You have to think of the community, you have to think of the people that you have around you. So I take in my board, you know, all the names of the people that I know who can be the best people for this particular project. And I personally love creating teams for a specific project, because not everyone is suited for everything, right? So, and for example, filmmaking has given me an excuse to work with across disciplines, because we need musicians, we need people with photography and visual arts background, we need writers, people who are more extroverted, introverted. So when you do filmmaking projects in the community, I feel that at least with teenagers, they feel that there is always a space for them. there's always a place for them in this project. And that's one of the things that I love, because no matter if you love to talk and you want to be in front of the camera, or you're an introvert and you are behind the camera, that's fine. There's a space for everyone, and everyone's work is exactly the same. It's valued the same. So I don't know, that's what I can say about collaboration.
Yeah, and I would say, you know, Alejandra is really great at collaboration, and I've been like part of her projects, and I also been following her work. So I think that for a non-designer, she's much more designer than many designers I know. I've seen in the chat, Rachel mentioned something very interesting. It's like, you know, she says, we'd love to hear about ways students can do ethnographic research remotely, particularly now that we can't meet with community partners in person. How can we still do deep research and observation? And this is a challenge that, you know, like people like us in this type of work is present. One of the advantages that I have is in my latest project that I was showing, it's in Ecuador and connected with Alejandra and her colleagues at Tiputini. So it's a little bit easier if I needed to get information, for example, for the children's illustration. But for some of the things that Alejandra was talking about, and also with Cynthia, it's very difficult because the students are not going to go anywhere. They're not going to be moving, right? And it's not the same if you're like walking around with your phone and trying to point out, oh, like they're doing this or that for like ethnographic studies. That won't work. So what are the suggestions and things that you have thought about? And this is open for not just the panelists, but also for everyone in this meeting.
I'll jump in. I'll post in the chat if I can find it. There's a very extensive Google Doc that's been circulating since March called "Pandemic Fieldwork Research During the Pandemic" or something like that. What the other thing that comes to mind is, in fact, the burden that this question puts on us, let's say within academia, perhaps now can create a more level playing field in terms of the burden that our work sometimes places on communities, where we want to like interview them again and take more documentation and have them welcome us into their home and interrupt their daily routines. So I love that idea, right? That we're now also overburdened. And I think, you know, listening toolkits, deploying ways that the community themselves are going to do the research with you or for you, finding ways of communicating, meeting them where they are with regards to their technology, their communication access, their mobility. I think it really creates this really beautiful, immersive moment of true empathy, I would say, between academics and non-academics.
Anyone else would like to share that have thought about these things? This is like open for all the participants.
If it's okay, I would like to jump in. I know I was on the chat responding. I think, Cynthia, I love what you just said about this pandemic giving us some space and a chance to really feel what that burden is like, and puts us in a position of, in some ways, disability, like we're lacking access now. And to me, because I think this kind of work is close to what I do, not just from the perspective of that, I've been on the receiving end of this work, growing up in Uganda and getting to interact with groups and organizations and people that have come in to conduct projects and things like that. And now being in a space and in a position of power where I could be doing that same work. And so for me, I've been asking of myself, how do I do this differently? And it's really helpful to see you all share your processes and your projects. And I actually think that, you know, as you talk about like things like collaborating with community, we don't always know what that really means or where the loopholes and the gaps are. So with the restrictions and limitations that the pandemic has given when it comes to ethnographic research, for me, what I'm realizing is this is exposing some of the gaps that exist in that process, right? So if we're collaborating with communities in a way that attempts to even the playing field, what I'm finding is that projects where I have clearly identified on-ground partners that are able to pick up this load. So for example, I can't be there in person to collect this research, but the research assistants that I'm working with on ground, that coming from the community, are able to go and actually train the community members, introduce them to Zoom, get them smartphones, depending on, of course, funding, teach them how to use it, and then we're able to have this communication virtually, right? And there's excitement on both ends, because then they now have the autonomy to learn their tools at their own pace. They're getting to learn from this experience as well, and then in turn sort of like feed back into the project. So for me, it's exposing those gaps that exist in my own process of how we truly enter these experiences and exit those experiences. So I think really making sure that we have champions who are not just like, oh, we're the community receiving this, but that we can also do this. You don't have to necessarily always be on ground. We can actually find ways to flip it and show that we can accomplish more on ground as well, and rethink that posturing a little bit. So it's possible, and I think this could be a great opportunity for a lot of us to pause and rethink critically those processes that we're using.
I thought about one of the things that you said about the phones, Benina, and this is from 2009-2010 project that I did in Kenya. And at that time, there wasn't connectivity in terms of internet, but most people in Kenya, in these rural villages, they carried 2 phones, not just one, but 2 phones, because the cell phone plans, depending on where you are, you will use one or another, and it was pretty cheap to add more minutes, but they were not using it for talking, but for text messaging. This is like very simple phones, not like, smartphones with a screen, but just text messaging. I'm talking about over 10 years ago. And I was surprised, amazed by how much connectivity the community members had. And when we were going in this project that I showed earlier very quickly, we were going from village to village around Kisumu area, around Lake Victoria, settlements near Lake Victoria. We will announce that we were going to be in a place for the following day, and lots of villagers will come and say that they have heard it from text messaging. So this idea of the technology that helps people communicate their needs and then interact with participants that are like working together for a common goal, I think is super important. Technology is, it could be a devil, right? Because we have problems and sometimes we get frozen on the screen, but it has so many opportunities for us to get more personal. How do you, from this experience with Shift, how do you feel this idea of the global village that we have right now, that we could connect with someone in Japan or in India, or, like friends here in Puerto Rico? How do you think it will help channel this idea of the education that now it's becoming global? You can learn from anywhere. Like Jenny was saying that she participated in this webinar with economists. That wasn't something that we would use in the past. So anyone has thoughts about that?
Well, I just want to say I don't have any specific kind of organizations or anything in mind, but what I was thinking was, I think obviously the whole world is experiencing this. So the whole world is thirsty for getting in touch with the rest of the world. And obviously the luxury we have in America is the technology and the budget for research and sciences and arts and design. So we have a plethora to offer, but we have to be, of course, aware that it's on an equal platform when we approach that exchange. But I would love to somehow get a listing, for lack of a better term, of organizations in other countries, the further the better, that are open and ready for this, whether they have experiences with design or whether they are in that boundary of research, design, creativity, problem solving, that are kind of ripe and ready for engagement Just thinking for myself, if I had a list like that right now, I would be contacting them daily before the semester starts, so I can be planning a whole bunch of things for my students. So if there is any resource, or even if there's individual organizations, if anybody is aware of, maybe if you can make a kind of a gathering of a list that we can initiate contact, that would be amazing.
Anyone else have questions or things to share? You know, things that we could actually follow up in the chat and Slack later on?
Yeah, I think, I mean, I'd love to hear from Mari if you want to jump in, but one, I wouldn't assume that everyone can learn, right? Can learn on Zoom and can be connected, and there's still a huge digital divide in the world. So we may be able to connect with people across countries, but in fact, I don't think we're breaking any kind of structures of boundaries of class and literacy levels and that kind of thing. So I think their technology really places a burden, you know, just with a group of artisans working in Guatemala, every few months, every time I would try to call somebody back, their phone number had changed. So I would always have to call like 4 or 5 people before I could get back in touch with the one person I was trying to reach. Now I see much more usage of WhatsApp, Facebook. So I think WhatsApp has been a really, I don't know if, I'm assuming there's probably case studies written about how WhatsApp has been probably the biggest technological equalizer, certainly in Latin America and perhaps in other places. Mari, you wanted to jump in?
See, yes, because thank you for letting me in, and Alberto to drag me back in because I was working in my studio. WhatsApp has become like a very strong tool. I have given lectures and full workshops in WhatsApp for Venezuela. They have a low connectivity, and they really have packed down how to do it. The project that I mentioned in the last panel that I did with a fellow people from Venezuela, the Educational Inclusive Guide, it basically is based on WhatsApp strategies to be used, on how to keep classes and courses in WhatsApp. So it's very interesting to approach simpler, low-tech approaches, enable to teach and communicate and organize communities. Not everything has to be high tech. That is my strong suggestion. But there's a lot of material there in how to work with WhatsApp, definitely. And also, technology is also used culturally, as you well has put it. It is not used the same way everywhere. It is different, you know. There's places in India and in Iran that the telephone, or in Africa, that the telephone is that is a public phone, and there's only one cellular, and that's the cellular for the community, you know. So those things we had to think about it when we design stuff as designers, and also when we teach designers here in the global north. How to design for other communities, ¿verdad? That they don't have this big technology, tú sabes? And beautiful work can be done that way, okay? Gracias for letting me in.
Gracias.
Can I add something? Yeah, now, Mari, that you mentioned how WhatsApp is being used in Latin America, in particular here in Ecuador, it is very interesting to see that after the crisis, in a lot of rural places, without technology, without internet or a strong and stable internet connection, we are using WhatsApp through the Secretary of Education to get all the lesson plans to families. So I have a photographer friend, she recently just did a whole photojournalism work following all these communities and how they are using, which sometimes we consider more basic technology such as WhatsApp, but that's sufficient and that's what they are using over there. In our case, after the earthquake, we also started doing a lot of work with cell phones. So you don't really need a lot of, you know, the latest technology to be able to tell a story and to study and to learn. And as someone mentioned earlier, And I think in the chat, sometimes we don't pay attention to all the abilities and the creativity of communities, because when you don't have a lot of resources, you have to be very, very creative to make things happen. So yeah, that was what I wanted to say.
Yeah, and on that note, I remember that my students, when they had the opportunity to travel overseas to work with these organizations, local organizations that work with their communities, they were surprised how they, you know, the lack of technology or advancements that are considered here so normalized were not an impediment for doing things. And I think that that's like part of like the from local to global and back to local, that we have discussions when we were like planning this meeting with Alejandra and Cynthia, that the work that we do that goes overseas or like across the states comes back to us. And then I think that we learn how to be resourceful. In 2017 in Houston, we have Hurricane Harvey, and we have to start classes 2 weeks later. And I also know that last year, Alejandra, in Ecuador, was a political unrest, if anyone has seen all those news, and they couldn't start the classes either. So this idea of shifting before we can actually go to normal, and I don't think there will be a normal anymore of what we used to do because of all the things that we have discussed. We have a few more minutes left. I don't know if anyone has like a specific question that hasn't been, like a pressing question that hasn't been answered. Just again, if you have any other follow-up questions, please share them on Slack. I want to like give a few more minutes to anyone that want to share something. I don't see. Yes, Penina, go ahead.
I have a question. This is something that I've been observing a little bit more, and I'm curious to hear from the panelists if it's something you've encountered or thought about. This idea of engaging with communities that have been overly engaged, overly surveyed, overly everything, right? So it's sort of like that fatigue. And I would say, like, you know, so for example, like in Uganda, it's starting to be this very problematic sort of mindset where local communities, because they have been overly engaged, let's say, with Western interventions that mean to do well, but oftentimes cause more harm than good, they have programmed themselves to know what answers these organizations or groups are looking for. So they might not necessarily tell you the truth of the matter. So for example, if you're going in, you want to build a well or whatever, they'll say, oh yeah, we need, we have issues with water and distance and everything, because they have learned that they have to figure out a way to benefit from this exchange at some point. They know that drill, come in, build a well, leave, right? You might not always think about the maintenance of the well, because oftentimes when it breaks down, that's it. No one knows how to repair it. No one knows where to get the parts for anything. So I started to see that there was this really, and I know that some organizations coming up that are operating in this area of like, yeah, let's collectively figure out, how to make sure when this organization that comes and they're looking for this, let's position ourselves strategically so, they can come, they'll do this thing, we'll get this stuff, and they'll leave. And, so it's like, I don't know, have you experienced that kind of conundrum?
Personally, the work that I've done with Design Global Change has always been with a nonprofit organization based locally in the region of the world that participated in these initiatives. And it was like a need that they wanted, address. And the funding was coming from the United States. So one of the key elements was avoiding that white man syndrome of coming, being the saviors, establishing, setting up the project. Here is your great solar panel, and then poof, go. And then like the thing breaks in 6 months and nobody knows what to do. So it's very important to work with the local organizations and establishing connections. So if something happens, like the solar panel breaks down, there's an organization also locally, a company that will help support technology that's why my projects were with Engineers Without Borders. For the first 5 years of Design Global Change, it was very important that there would be a network. I was wondering if panelists Alejandra or Cynthia have anything to say about that.
Yeah, I can jump in. We've had cases here in the city of New York where 2 faculty from Parsons will contact the same community organization, and it's the organization that tells them, do you know that your colleague also wants to work with us? Which is really kind of a worst case scenario there. Neighborhoods that become trendy. So there was a period of time where all of our community engagement projects in New York City were in Hunts Point and the Bronx. And we're great at starting the work, at doing the work, and we're terrible at measuring the impact of our work, intentional or not. And so that's something I certainly advocate for, doing less of these projects, but doing them more thoughtfully. And the other thing I would say is the equity-centered community design field guide has really been quite inspiring for me to stop assuming, to really kind of break down this us and them, that there's an organization, that there's academia, that there's designers and non-designers, and instead really thinking about, let's, as a provocative way, let's just not do any community engagement whatsoever. And instead, perhaps, how can we share, what can we share with communities so that they then develop that expertise, perhaps, that we think we can bring to them. And I find that field guide a really great way to introduce that concept with students and with faculty.
Oh, well,
can I add something?
very, very quick.
Last week I was part of the jury, and we were giving away the National Prize for Community-Based Filmmaking here in Ecuador. So I had to read and evaluate about 12 different projects, and it was very interesting to see that a lot of these projects had support from international big NGOs and organizations that would help them, write a very strong narrative about how to do, community filmmaking, especially in the Amazon. Because if you think of Ecuador, you would think of the Amazon and the Galapagos, but what about other regions? So for us, as the jury, it was a very difficult task to choose who, for projects to win this money, because we were also trying to do the redistribution of resources and also support those communities without the assistance of international NGOs that would, help them develop this project. So I see that all the time, especially here in Ecuador, who gets more attention and support and why. So I can talk more, but I don't want to. I'm sorry. Almost
well,
over.
we are running out of time, so I just wanted to wrap up because I know that there's like a very sharp cut. I wanted to thank you again for everyone participating. Here are our email addresses in case you want to get in touch with us. We also are active in the Slack channel, so please stay involved. These are like this idea of the local and global is something that is way more important right now because of this shift.